Hi, I'm Bill Simmons, and welcome to my channel, Closer to God in 15 Minutes or Less, Biblical Studies. You might recall from episode 1 that I set forth several sectors or topics that I'm going to be talking about, and one of them was direct Bible study, and this is the inaugural video of that particular portion of my channel here, and we're going to study Paul's epistle to the Philippians. But before I get started, allow me to share something with you. Important areas of our life, like our physical health and the medical field, we want to know something about the person that's talking to us. And I feel the same way about biblical theological studies, our spiritual life, that we should know something about the person that's talking to us about these areas here. And so allow me to share a little bit about myself here. I have a Bachelor of Arts, a Master of Arts, a Master of Divinity, and a PhD. All of them are in New Testament studies in Greek with an emphasis on the Pauline epistles here. My PhD is from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. That's where Will and Kate went to school. I went to school before they did, I might add here. But I said all this to share that, I feel really comfortable sharing from the scriptures with you. Now, what did I do with all of that? I taught biblical studies in a international Bible school in Germany for 3 years. When I was at St. Andrews, they assigned me to 2 Greek exegetical courses. One was in the Gospel of Matthew, and then the other was in Paul's Epistle to the Galatians here. And after that, I taught for 36 years at a Christian liberal arts university, Lee University. I taught undergraduate and graduate courses. So, I just want to let you know that, I'm committed to this area. I'm committed to theological and biblical studies here. So, all right, let's get right into Paul's epistle to the Philippians. We're going to start with a general overview of the epistle here. And the first thing I'd like to say is that the church at Philippi was a very generous church. The epistle says that they gave to the Apostle Paul on 4 separate occasions. And it's pretty interesting that near the end of Paul's missionary life here, he took up a huge collection for the poor saints in Jerusalem here. And he somewhat chides the Corinthian church that they've fallen behind on their giving. And he actually commends the Philippian church as an example of giving. He said they gave out of their poverty and they gave beyond their means. And so, Corinthians, get with it here. Look at the Philippian church, very generous church. Another issue is that there are no major doctrinal and theological errors in the church at Corinth, unlike the churches in Ephesus and Colossae that may have had a very early form of Gnosticism that was plaguing their churches. Also, there's no evidence of the so-called Judaizing controversy. Now, what that's about is the early church had a real challenge of how do believers relate to historic Judaism? Do they need to be first converted to Judaism? Do all the male Gentiles need to be circumcised? Does everyone need to obey the law of Moses before they can accept Jesus as the Messiah? Or can everybody come just as they are? Everyone is justified by faith. Everyone is saved by grace. What's the order of the day here? And that problem does not appear to be present in Philippi, although Paul warns the Philippians that they need to be on their guard. These people may come to your church and they may try to coerce you to convert to Judaism first. So be on the lookout here, right? Philippians also gives us real insight into the emotional world of the Apostle Paul. He lets his hair down. He tells about his feelings. He tells about his internal thoughts here. So it's a very interesting epistle. The bottom line is that the church at Philippi really serves as a model church for us to take a look at here. Now, let me talk about some technical issues. The first is that of authorship. We're going to look at it under 2 categories. Number 1 is the internal evidence, and the number two is the external evidence. The internal evidence is the data that we can gather from the actual text of the Epistle to the Philippians. The external evidence is information that we can gather from outside of the text itself, like the early church fathers, for example. Now, with regard to the text itself, right up front at the beginning, Paul's name is affixed to all of our early manuscripts of this epistle here. Also, there are references to Timothy and Epaphroditus in Philippians here, and they're co-workers of the Apostle Paul mentioned in some of his other epistles. So that supports Pauline authorship here. And let me just say this, that theologically and linguistically, the epistle is classically Pauline. Jesus is the mediator. Salvation is in his cross. We're justified by faith. The sentence structure is clearly Pauline. The vocabulary is clearly Pauline. So, yeah, with regard to the internal evidence of the epistle, there's no doubt that the Apostle Paul is the author. Now, with regard to the external evidence, let me just say this, that all of the early church fathers, that is, the successors to the apostles, all of them accept that Paul is the author. There's no controversy in their writings about this. They very, smoothly say, just as Paul says in his epistle to the Philippians there. So the sum of the matter is that with regard to internal and external evidence, everything points to Paul as the author of this great epistle here. Now, when was it written? The date. It's very clear that Paul is in prison, and that's why Philippians is listed among the prison epistles here. But the question is, which imprisonment? Was he in Caesarea, where he was in prison for 2 years in an early portion of his ministry, or is he in prison in Rome, which he spent 2 years in prison there as well for the sake of Christ, and that was in the latter part of his ministry here. One thing that gives us some direction here is that Paul says in Philippians that his witness has spread throughout the Praetorian Guard. And we'll talk more about that later on, but the Praetorian Guard was basically the bodyguard for the emperor, the Caesar, and it numbered about 6,000 soldiers kind of arrayed in concentric rings around Rome. And so, since Paul says his witness has spread to the entire Praetorian Guard, that leans in the direction of a Roman imprisonment. So what does that say about date? Now, Paul was imprisoned there probably in the area of 61 to 64 AD, and near the end of that, around 64 AD, he was executed under the Emperor Nero. We got pretty good evidence for that. And since in the epistle, Paul indicates that he may be executed very soon, I lean more towards the AD 64 area for the time that Paul penned the epistle to the Philippians here. Now, let's look at another area that we can gain information about the background of Philippians, and that is the book of Acts. The book of Acts, it really is our earliest record of the history of the church here, and it says quite a few things about Paul's ministry in Philippi here. Probably we should begin with the famous Macedonian vision of the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 16. At that point, right in the midst of Paul's second missionary journey here, the missionary team really didn't know where it should go. So it just kind of hovered there in the area of Troas, which is the ancient city of Troy. Very interesting that Troas is located right in the center on the northern shore of the Mediterranean Sea, right in the center, dividing it, what we might call the east from the west there. And they're in Troas, and Paul has a vision in the night. He sees a man from Macedonia, which is Greece. He sees a man from Greece beckoning him, come over here and help us, come over here and help us. And Paul shares that in the morning with the rest of the team, and they all conclude that they should go west into Greece rather than to go east into the Orient, so to speak, there. And when they do that, they encounter the city of Philippi, and one of the first persons they encounter is a businesswoman. Her name is Lydia, and she converts to the faith here. She is the first European convert in the church. So what we see here, I think, is a momentous event here of the gospel going west into Europe rather than going east into the Middle East and ultimately the Orient. And, that had momentous consequences. I cannot, go through the history of the early church here, of the Reformation history and pilgrims coming to the United States and the First Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening. But with this move to Philippi, the church enters into Europe, and the rest literally is church history unto this very moment here. Let me say some additional events that we can see in Acts. Is some extraordinary occurrences happened in Philippi. One was there was a young slave girl. It says very clearly that she was a slave girl, and she was a fortune teller, and she was bothering Paul and Silas here. And finally, Paul the apostle really he turned around and he just exorcised that spirit out of her. Luke says that the girl had a spirit called Pneumatology, the spirit of Pytho here. And this is part of ancient mythology, that creation was formed by way of a great snake. You hear Pytho there, sounds like Python, doesn't it? And the spirit of this great snake served as the mouthpiece of the god Apollo here. And it could empower people to tell fortunes here. And Paul exorcised this spirit of Pytho out of this slave girl. Well, she couldn't tell fortunes anymore, and it created a great tumult here. And Paul and Silas were arrested. They were in jail, and they sang hymns at midnight, so to speak. And there was an earthquake, and all the bars of the jail were open, and the Philippian jailer was getting ready to commit suicide, as a good Roman soldier should do when he fails in his duty. But Paul prevents him, and that jailer is converted to Christ. So we have these things. We have conversion of Lydia and the entrance of the gospel into Europe. We have the exorcism of the Pneumatology, as Luke calls it here, and we have the conversion of the Philippian jailer here. It is a powerful church. It is a generous church. It is a model church, and it is a church that really set the direction for the rest of the gospel all throughout church history, really, of the church going west into Europe. Okay, we've completed part 1 of Philippians' Epistle of Joy, and what I hope to do is have part 2, part 3, part 4 until we finish the series. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make up a playlist, whereas after you watch one part, you can go to the next part, and so on and so on. Appreciate you watching. God bless.